Good afternoon and welcome. We are so delighted to have everybody with us today for our SVDX webinar. My name is Nancy Easterbrook. I am Executive Director of Silicon Valley Directors Exchange. For those of you new to SVDX, we encourage you to go to our website, svdx.org, to check out some of our past webinars and recordings, as well as our calendar of events coming up. I'm very pleased today to have our webinar, the technical title that we came up with, a Director's Survival Guide to New Technologies and Destructive Disruption. Our biggest challenge, to be honest, we'll be keeping this within 60 minutes because there is so much to share and discuss and talk about. It's really my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Brianne and Jeff have been with us for a while. You've probably seen them on some of our other sessions. So I am very grateful for their time and contributions to today's session. I'll do a brief introduction before we get started. Brianne Gaforafar is a full stack entrepreneur on a mission to build disruptive technologies that can help people live and work better. Brianne is co-founder of Entify, an AI software and hyper-automation company based in Palo Alto. She currently holds 15 patents issued by USPTO and has been covered by international media, including Forbes, Fast Company, CNN Money, NBC, and the Huffington Post. Jeff Wong is the Global Chief Innovation Officer at Ernst & Young, challenging everything from the way EY operates internally to how they provide services to their clients. He works across the entire organization to help identify, share, and scale the best ideas. He brings deep experience across strategy, investing, and building new ventures globally. Our moderator for today, Dan Siciliano, is a successful technology CEO founder and entrepreneur and recognized expert in corporate strategy and governance. He is chair of the board of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco and currently chairman of SVDX, board member of the Latino Corporate Directors Education Foundation, chair of the Council of Federal Home Loan Banks, and a fellow at Stanford University. Per usual, we encourage you to submit your questions via the Q&A feature on Zoom. Please do so throughout today's webinar, and we will do our best to fold them into the conversation. Thank you again for joining us today. Special thanks to Brianne and Jeff and Dan. I'll let you take it away.
Great, thank you, Nancy. It is super fun today to have a chance to talk to Brianne and Jeff. Normally in any given room, particularly of directors, I am the most tech savvy, but I'm not even close by a long shot with this panel. And so I will be asking many questions, some of which the answers I probably will not have even imagined, much less known. So with that, let me jump in with kind of an opener for each of you. And it's an effort to pull a little bit of optimism out of the big picture measure that we're drawing for directors. And that is, there is a lot of change underway, right? We're going to name a bunch, not the least of which is AI, but there's a lot of other big, fast-moving, hyper-disruptive technology trends. And everyone always says that, and then sometimes it turns out really to be the case, sometimes less so. But it has a feeling right now of things changing so quickly and so fundamentally that it can be overwhelming, right? And it's almost kind of like, well, what's a board to do, right? So let's assume that you're a director, you sit on a board. It's not necessarily a technology company, but of course, almost everything's sort of a technology company. You're either beholden to technology, you're enabled by it, or you're disrupted by it. But it seems to me that there's so much coming so fast at directors that it's not unreasonable to just feel completely overwhelmed. So my one question to start us off would be, what is your view about directors' ability to deal with what we're about to talk about? I'm fishing for some optimism here, right? Because we're going to name all these things, and they're like these giant locomotives coming down the tracks, and there we are, kind of tied to the tracks. Before we get to that part, what would you say to directors who have to confront massive disruptive technological change generally? Any big picture words of advice? Let's start there. Maybe Jeff, you both do this for a living, but Jeff, you really do this every day for a living. So I'm going to have you kick it off, but then I'm going to go to Brianne.
Well, Dan, thank you. And Nancy, thank you so much for having me here today. So you're right. If you're looking for that dose of optimism, this is really an interesting moment in time. When these technology shifts happen, you have the opportunity to compete differently in your marketplace. So what I see in these timeframes, and we can go back to the old studies and look at it, is this is a time that the number twos become number ones, the number fours can become number two, right? You can move your competitive position. So as a board, from an optimistic sense, I would really look at it as an opportunity to serve your customers better, an opportunity to think about your organizations differently, an opportunity to really move forward into the brave new world. The second thing I would say is that, a lot of boards haven't necessarily thought about these technology shifts so much that they have a particular committee or group of people who they can bring onto the board. I think this is a unique moment where you'll be given permission to think about expanding boards and specific committees to address a lot of these deep, interesting issues. And the last thing I'll say, it's just a lot of fun to learn about this. I think Brienne knows, and I've talked about this before. It's so interesting to be able to think about the world in new ways, that there's a lot of fun and growth just as board members to see a world differently than perhaps it's been for the last 10, 50, or in our industry's case, 150 years.
That's a great start, Jeff. I'm going to have Brienne go, and then I might do a couple of takeaway summaries from that. Then we'll dive into the tech. But Brienne, go ahead. What's your thought on this?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I think that was so spot on, Jeff, I think one of the things that I think about a lot is the opportunities for the future in terms of saving time. There's so many things that are manual today, or they were a couple years ago, that can otherwise be automated or have become automated, right? We think about those little steps that we can take that can just change our business, right? If we think about this leap in technology, we've seen it a couple times before. I don't think we've seen it quite this drastic or moving quite as fast as we're seeing this today, but it is familiar. It's a familiar feeling, right? I think we talk about how the internet changed a lot for us, right? We talk about how mobility changed a lot, cloud technologies changed a lot. This is another one of those S curves in technology. It's just moving so quickly, and it definitely is extremely drastic in the way it's having an impact on so many different industries. To some extent, even brick and mortar businesses are thinking, how do we leverage AI, right? How is that getting into, our scope? So I think the opportunities for saving time is, what we think about every day, at least at our company and with our customers and, with everyday consumers. And I think we all can get lost in the buzzwords. And believe it or not, that's a big source of stress, right? How do I keep up with the buzzwords? How do I keep up with the news? What's being thrown at me every day, whether I'm an employee or I'm an employer or I'm an investor, right? Or I, have my own set of businesses wherever they may be in whatever industry. So if we just keep on top of the mission, right? If we keep updated with where we're looking to go, and we think, okay, how can we leverage technology and these trends, we'll call it, or these evolutions of technology to get us there faster and more efficiently and in a cost-effective manner, then we're keeping our eyes on the prize, right? And we're using these tools as a way to just get there faster and more effectively. And I think that's where our focus needs to be today.
Great. I'm going to explore the tactics of how directors can keep up a little later as we get through a couple of the topics. But while we, shift gears, and again, I do want to encourage people to submit questions. We will weave them into our conversation. We'll certainly leave a little bit of time at the end, and we won't get to everything, I'm sure of it. In fact, full disclosure, in our practice conversation, the time was gone, and we're like, ooh, we've only covered 3 points. So I'm sure something similar will happen today. Let me start off by just asking maybe each of you to pick a technological disruption. It can be a technology, a category. We promised several in the intro, so we should at least touch on some of those. And then describe to us why, arguably, as a disruptive phenomena technologically, it is either bigger, faster, different from what has come before, and what we should be looking at or thinking about in terms of its ramifications. And you can pick the same one if you want. You can just go deeper if you like. But I'll give Brienne the chance to go first this time, and then I'll ask Jeff to chime in. So maybe pick one, give us the why it's different, if it is, maybe it's not, and then the what to do about that.
Can you, Dan, I apologize. The first part of your question cut out for me. Can you please repeat the first part? No
worries. Well, I'm surprised you don't have an AI avatar monitoring it and just kind of synthesizing what I would have said better if only the AI had said it.
This is how you know I'm real, is because there's real in the conversation.
So the first part is pick one tech area and then identify that and why, if it is, how it's different, bigger, faster, more disruptive, and then what we should be looking for as directors as it comes down, and lands in front of us or runs us over, as the case may be, or allows us to hitch a ride and, move from number 4 to number 1, perhaps. So maybe pick one and let's run with it.
Oh, we were just talking about this in our last call when it comes to news aggregation and summarization, right? Like one of the areas where we're all just so overloaded is how we get our daily news and how we separate, real news from fake news versus trends versus key takeaways, right? This is an area where today people are spending a lot of time trying to use AI as a way to streamline that process. That's one area right now. I know at Entify, we're using technologies in many ways for enterprise companies as a way to save them time with complex business process, and using automation as a way to make those 10, 20 manual steps, make them 2, 3 steps that are using automation. So I think there are many different ways right now where AI technology is coming in and creating disruption. So then you look back at this 20-year-old process where you were using Excel spreadsheets and you had 100 dedicated people, and now you can leverage AI and automation as a way to change the way those 100 people were working manually, put them in more creative positions, and now you have technology as a way to create automation, reliability, lack of human error, right? And you have this reliable process that you're creating for scalability over the next 20 years in your enterprise, and creating a sense of scale. So I think there's definitely many areas for this. We have other examples where, you're dealing with finance and trading and, crypto and different areas where humans are just really not meant to deal with things that take 24 hours in a day, right? Or watch trends that are changing for 24 hours in a day. We have technologies where we watch market trends, we perform analysis, we make predictions based on things and variables that are changing constantly. This is where AI and technology can be used so that humans can rest the mind, do things that are more creative, more innovative, and you let the machines do things that are more redundant or repeatable. And that's where I think the impact for technology is today, especially right now when you have so many different aspects and tools right in your tool belt, right? And that doesn't mean that every director or executive needs to be an expert in AI or every kind of AI approach, right? It just means that we all need to understand what our use cases are and how do we dedicate teams and initiatives to achieving those in a time and cost-effective manner.
That's great. In fact, I think we'll probably come back to this, but this concept of broadly survey, summarize, then aggregate and synthesize, right? So that process is something humans have done for a long time. It's actually a very difficult process, but clearly if anyone's been playing around at all with any LLM or other, you've probably prompted some sort of output where you say, look at this and make a chart and list, 1992 to 2019 and break into the following 4 categories. And what would have been a day or two of, hopefully not you, but maybe an associate or an intern, right, going through and assembling this stuff and cutting and pasting what is now unbelievably automated, right? And so that tool as repeated across everything is interesting. I think we're going to come back to a couple of questions about, but is that something we can rely on? How do directors understand, the veracity of these? So, well, I'll come back to that question. But first, Jeff, I want you to chime in with your own selection.
Yeah.
We'll see if there's some common elements and we might weave those together.
So I'll go big picture to answer your question. So, naturally the conversation right now is all about AI, and I'll touch on 1 or 2 other things just for the interest of, you said we offered multiple technologies. But you and I think Brienne outlined very powerful use case of why it's interesting right now. But you asked the question, why is it following a pathway or a similar or different pathway than before? There is something different about the adoption of AI and the impact of AI than other technologies that we've seen in the past. One of the underlying reasons is this stuff has been around for many decades, 1940s, 50s, a lot of research that had been done over many, many years. And so when it became practical, we had the processing and the storage power, and we had suddenly the databases that we needed sorted and organized in a certain way. It became immediately powerful because you were riding off of so much historical research, work that had been done in a lot of different academic institutions. So when we started down our journey, so I owned AI at EY from 8 years ago, 9 years ago. We started down that journey thinking it was a science experiment. right? Oh, we're going to test this new technology, great, interesting hype cycle with self-driving cars and all those things that were happening. We'll figure this out over the next 5, 6 years. It'll be fine. We were immediately ROI positive. And this is what Brianna is indicating. Like the time to profit, either revenue, increasing revenues at the same cost, or decreasing your costs associated with doing something. And for us, all of our initial use cases were automating different things, making our humans faster. Again, immediately profitable. Most of the metrics are 10 times faster, 5 times more accurate. The other thing, we didn't hit on this hard, but it's true. Humans aren't particularly accurate, right? We make mistakes, we get tired, all those things. If you can introduce machines into the equation as an aid to humans, you're far more accurate, and time is a ridiculous improvement. That is a generic statement across hundreds of different AI projects that we've done, right? In the early days. Now what's interesting with the onset of sort of transformer technology and a buzzword, but all the generative AI, all the ChatGPT things that you're seeing is that the AI is no longer, this sort of more expensive system that you have to train up and do these things. Now it comes pre-trained, which is what the P stands for in GPT, pre-trained. So it's out of the box. It can do so many interesting things. And entering the world of creativity, write a poem, write a movie short, write a script, write an essay if you're a student, all these things that it can do were very remarkable because you can pre-train on such a large amount of data and information that exists. So it's already building off of a number of things, and that's why it's so powerful right now. I'll just do one real quick one on blockchain, really cryptocurrency. I just want to point out, it's interesting. We all thought that blockchain and cryptocurrency was the next great thing when it hit $3 trillion in valuation. And everyone thought, this is terrible. This is all fraud. When it went under $1 trillion, went to 800 billion, which I always reminded people, Dan, I think you know this, I always said, $800 billion is still a lot of money, right? Like it's still a lot. It's almost all the way back up to 3 trillion. And now it's with the regulatory infrastructure underneath it, which was always one of the barriers. So I'll just throw that out as an interesting tidbit, although imagine most of the questions are on AI.
Yeah, and we can come back to that. And actually, our questions so far have to do with culture and people. So I do want to switch to that sooner rather than later. I saw our pre-registration list. I just perused who's on this list, and I don't think we're convincing or need to convince anybody who's listening right now that these are disruptive technologies. There's a few people on the list who could describe them just as well as, certainly as well as me, and maybe as well as you two. So we'll come back to the culture and people, but I want to highlight maybe this idea of interactive disruption. So your opening, I think, gave this positive note of directors at the very least are supposed to be good about strategy. And you kind of said, Jeff, and Brian, you reinforced this, that this much disruption, this much efficiency enhancing tools and opportunity is really a chance to deploy strategy, right? There will be winners and losers. And the emphasis here is that strategy will probably have an impact on who wins, and failed strategy who loses. So I wonder if you could highlight for me where there are places where there's an intersection, not just AI, but rather AI and blockchain, or AI and robotics. And, and feel free to build on this one point. And Brandon, I don't think you've been doing this quite long enough, though you started very young. Jeff, you have, where 15 or 20 years ago, the robotics world adopted the language of the military in terms of ideal jobs to replace, right? It was the 3Ds, dull, dirty, or dangerous. And the dull and the dirty were because of human preferences. If it's dull, we get bored. If it's dirty, we don't like it. The dangerous, oddly, there are plenty of people in this world who like dangerous. They're kind of adrenaline junkies, but there's a public policy thing where you'd rather people not die. So those three things, they still seem to show up in the current implementation of really disruptive technology with some permutations. So give us something where you think there's a combination of the technologies we take for granted happening, and where that might strategically interface with a good fit for where we will see that disruption. I would throw out the iPhone and smartphones were an intersection of like 7 or 8 progressive technologies that really 3 or 4 years before that got better by a lot. And then when you combine them, you had the capacity for a smartphone. So I'm looking for something like that. And SVDX reserves the rights for any great ideas you come up with that are novel to co-publish those with you. But go ahead.
I'm happy to jump in, Brianne. If
All right, go, please.
So I'll go, Dan. I love to go a little bit off the path, off your path. I think the combination of AI with your legacy technology, and I think that's particularly a powerful concept for board directors of medium and large companies, because I think there is something in the dialogue which is, oh my gosh, we're doing this AI thing and we're going to throw away all the stuff we did before.
Yeah.
What we've noticed, my team builds a lot of these technologies for our firm for our own purposes. And what we've noticed actually is that we can use like a large language model, a chat type function as a glue that sits on top of a lot of our legacy investments in different technologies, which show up as APIs, so show up as access to those software systems in different ways. But the glue that a ChatGPT type of interaction offers for an individual, a worker, an employee trying to come into the system, makes it far more powerful than ever before. So I'll do a simple version of what we do, and the analogy you can create into your own companies. But we do taxes for people, right? So if you're a younger tax person, you might say, hey, I have this tax issue with this company. Which tax forms do I need to file? And what the chat function, large language model, is good at saying, hey, I think you need to file these 18 different forms in these ways. But we probably have systems on the back end about how to actually fill in the forms. And so we're using the chat function as the glue, the employee, the tax professional at the front end saying, okay, it's these 18 tax forms, help me fill them out, and it'll walk through the different questions. But it's basically using your legacy systems to understand the steps in the process, to file it, sometimes to do math. If the system, if the chat system isn't as good as math, you can do math in those systems. So it really has enhanced and made our legacy investments far more powerful and accessible and easy to use for a much wider swath of our employee base. So Dan, I think that combination is going to be pretty magical for the directors who are on the call now to think about as they think about their systems. Oh, we'll use this as an enhancement, as an accelerator on top of the things our systems already do. But frankly, the old way we did software, a little bit brittle, they break a lot, your employees don't always know where to go, those types of things that hindered adoption. This is a way for us to significantly accelerate adoption, and we're seeing early signs of that already.
Yeah. I'll add maintenance to that, right? Like harder to maintain legacy systems. One thing, Jeff, I was going to add to what Jeff said, because he said it so well. One of the things that we're all thinking about as even current executives, and I know enterprises, they deal with this on such a large scale, right? Legacy burden, it's a big burden, right? You think about cost, you think about replacement costs, you think about teams. There's a lot to think about there in terms of, okay, if I'm going to bring in a new initiative, what's all the other stuff I have to get rid of and replace? And I think that's such an intimidating initiative for a lot of executives, especially at the board level. It's a real commitment that has to be made at a time like this, because if you want to go through AI transformation, it really starts at the top. It starts at the top to say, okay, we are committed to making XYZ changes over XYZ timeframe with XYZ investment to be able to compete in this market, right? To be able to differentiate ourselves from everybody else in our space. And these are the kind of changes that need to be made. If that commitment is not there at the board or executive level, then the teams are not going to be very motivated to do it, right? Because they're going to be concerned about either their jobs, or they're going to be concerned about the amount of work that's going to go into it, right? If you think about all the IT teams and all the overhauling that needs to be done or things like that. But the way to make that less intimidating is to think about augmentation effort. It's really augmentation effort. What Jeff just mentioned makes a lot of sense. It's using your legacy process and knowledge and learning and tacking on these new approaches and new tools as a way to accelerate the opportunities, right? And to increase your ROI. You're always thinking about, okay, I used this software last year. Well, this year there's a better, more advanced software. It's just, a little bit more expensive. It may take a little bit of overhead to put in, but once I do, I'll be 10 years ahead. So I think that's the kind of, initiative that we're all talking about. And to Dan's comment, I think the opposite of, dull and dirty and dangerous, right? I think is what Dan said, is exciting, clean, and safe, right? And that's the kind of jobs that we want to keep. So if you think about it, that's the kind of stuff that motivates us. So it just so happens that there's so many jobs in the 3Ds with huge ROI potential. And both socially and economically, that's what we need to be promoting right now. So I think it needs to be a concerted effort when you're guiding a ship to be able to say, this is what we want to achieve over this period of time, and not expecting that change to happen overnight, right? AI transformation, it's a journey, it's not a transaction. And this is something we were just talking about. I was telling Jeff, I had another speaking at my alma mater a couple of weeks ago for the AACSB, and they're part of the accreditation setup for universities nationally. And some globally as well, that they flew over. And this is such a big conversation that the academic institutions are talking about. How do we leverage AI in our classrooms? How do we leverage it for our professors? How do we stay ahead? Because our curricula, if it's falling behind and our students are using, Gen AI, they're using GPT to write their papers and essays, how do we start to grade, properly, right? How do we keep ahead when our students are becoming so advanced with these tools? So this conversation is just moving so quickly that we have to keep ahead of it. And a lot of it just starts with the commitment to the initiatives and just starting from somewhere and then advancing at each step of the way.
That's great. You've each queued up several of the questions. So I'm going to jump to some of the questions, then we'll come back to kind of the other items we want to hit. The first one, I'm going to call him out because I have to make fun of him just a little bit. Mark Lonergan actually asked a question that pertains to, I think you gave half the answer, Brian, at least. Why is generative AI so challenging to programize for large enterprise clients? When will the industry come up with an oracle of AI with ready-to-use solutions for large companies? Here's the poke of fun at Mark. I think you're romanticizing Oracle, just for the record. Like, I don't think anyone says, Oracle, how wonderful, let's plug it in and go. No, you plug it in and then 80% of what you just paid to plug it in, you pay again to make it work. So, apologies to anyone who's currently in love with Oracle. Please raise your hand. We'll write you down as the perennial optimist. But with that in mind, it's a good point, right? And both of you kind of addressed it, where it seems very daunting. Why isn't there an easy way to flip the switch? What if the board and the management say, what we got to do is we just got to imbue our entire organization with generative AI from beginning to the end, and that'll help us compete. So break that down for us. Is this the wrong premise? What stands in the way of large deployment? Should we only do the augmentation strategy that you both hinted at? Yeah, give us your thoughts about Mark's question. Brianne, you go first.
Jeff, I just have a quick thought here. So there's a couple of things that are interesting. We deal with enterprises where everybody has, different kinds of business process, different levels of complexity in business process. We are at the middle of Gen AI, analytical AI, and automation. And what we find is dealing with the combination is what allows us to service enterprise and deliver products to them that fulfill the needs that they have to properly manage and address their business process, right? You throw in something out of the box, throw in something that's overly specific to a specific type of tool, and it's not necessarily going to fulfill their 20-year-old legacy of business process. And in an enterprise, that is what's very hard to change, right? Changing technology is one thing, changing legacy business process is another, right? And I know Jeff knows this because he's probably deals with the exact same thing. So I think generally speaking, dealing with this combination of tools, if you think about Gen AI or automation or analytical or any combination of these as just tools in a tool belt, then you don't have to be attached to just one over the other, right? A business use case is just a use case. Now, how do we achieve that use case becomes the next couple of steps, right? So Gen AI has a couple challenges around precision, right? Or around, hallucinations, which is, can be a big challenge depending on the kind of data you're dealing with, the kind of use case you're dealing with, traceability for decision-making, right? LLMs aren't quite as reliable for certain analytical AI capabilities. So many enterprises today, they're not as well optimally addressed with Gen AI as they may be with that middle ground of dealing with the three together. And so that's why we have a very successful product model when it comes to using these tools as a combination. And I think often that's why just focusing on Gen AI, and that became a challenge when ChatGPT came out, it just brought publicity to this specific type of technique, right? And that's why the whole market says, okay, how do we go use Gen AI in everything, right? Go have an intern, install an LLM, go, have a team, go focus on Gen AI. But the reality is that's not perfect for every kind of use case, especially when you're dealing with very complex business process, right? So that's just one piece of comment that I'll make, because we deal with this a lot as we work with different customers.
Yeah, that's great. The framing is great. And Jeff, I want you to kind of expand on that, but let me just reframe it, restate it real quickly. I think your point is in part, don't think of it as the magical overhaul cure-all, but rather, as an incremental and relevant to break it into at least three parts. You got the Gen AI, analytical AI, and then the process automation, whatever form that takes. And to just incrementally try to do what you're doing better, faster, more smoothly, more accurate. And if you look at it that way, as a strategic and kind of implementation matter, it is a lot less daunting in some ways, and also prone, by the way, to fewer failure modes. And I will say, if anyone has played this game, this will resonate, I suspect. Brienne, I bet if we had you play this game, whatever group you're in might win. And it is, you take these long reeds and a little bit of string and a little bit of tape, and then you have a marshmallow, not a little marshmallow, a big marshmallow, and you put people into teams, you set them at a table, and you say, you have 6 minutes to build the tallest structure you can that will support the marshmallow. And we won't waste time going into what types of different groups do different things. Let's just say all CEOs, boy, you could videotape that and make like the greatest hits on Instagram. It's all CEO groups, disaster. But let's say you have a functional group. What's intriguing about adults is they want an all or nothing. They take into the last 30 seconds and they build their design and it tips over. Little kids are a wonder to watch. They try and try and try and try and try. They don't debate who's the chair. They don't debate which model is best. They just keep trying and they incrementally make process. So you've sort of highlighted, I think, Brienne, in a way, this generative AI is so exciting and so big that people want to do this big thing with it. And maybe it shouldn't be a big thing. It should be a lot of advances. We're going to come back to what directors can do with that tidbit. But Jeff, you operate in a wide range of interactions with medium and large, not very small, but medium, large, and mega enterprises. So did what Brienne said, does that resonate? And what would you add to that if it does?
Yeah, so I think the question is, why can't I just, who's my single source? Like, who's right. Where can I go to? And the fact is, it sort of burst onto the scene, the popular scene, like 15, 20 months ago. Like this is actually a relatively recent set of dialogues that people want to entertain and love and do. So what you're seeing is the buildup of the ecosystem, right? So the foundational models are now, the main ones are all extraordinarily well-funded and maybe some of the fastest growing companies ever, right? In terms of the traction, 0 to 100 million users, 0 to $1 billion in revenue. We're talking the fastest ever in history, which makes it the fastest ever in mankind, right? In technology history, which would make it fastest ever in mankind. So these are very rapidly growing organizations, but they're still starting from 0 from 15 months ago. So you're seeing that build up right now. And right now, when I go around, I see not just the foundational layers, but all the ecosystem that needs to fill in are being very well funded and are racing to answer all of these questions. The fact is they're able to answer a lot of the questions in a relatively straightforward way. So from a board of directors perspective, legal liability, that was a question a year ago, right? Oh my goodness, are we going to get sued because we trained on an LLM and they use data from somebody somewhere? You see some of the public deals that have been made. You also see indemnification now happening at the software company level, right? So they're coming out saying, we'll indemnify from here. Hallucinations, there are many ways now to deal with the hallucination rates. Not all perfect yet, as Brienne has rightfully pointed out, but now we have many tools, and there's tool companies that'll come and catch the hallucination at the point of the customer, meaning before it allows you to display an answer, it'll say, that's actually not factually correct. It does a check and it pauses it right there and allows you to catch. So these toolings are coming out. So the ecosystem is being built out at a very, very rapid speed, faster than I've seen before. And I've been hanging out in Silicon Valley for a while. So it's a pretty remarkable jump forward. But that's why you probably don't see that single source yet. Now I'm starting to see very clearly the vertical companies coming out. So in the legal side, there's a couple really famous. They're all clients of ours, so I won't say the names, but you can look them up. In the legal field, there are a few very famous companies that are focused on the legal use cases, tax use case. Ours, we see them all the time. Accounting, we see them all the time. Right. And now I'm hearing more about manufacturing. It's sort of going down the list of industries, these companies being formed, but it is early.
Yeah.
The problem for directors, it's different from before, is the impact can come so quickly, right? That if you're not willing to be there at the moment now where you're experimenting, seeing it, testing, right? Your companies aren't testing things at this. The opportunity at this moment, the opportunity to catch it later, right, really doesn't exist the way it used to. Meaning the pace is just too fast. The return, the ROI for your
Won't
competitors.
have another Microsoft near miss of the internet catch-up scenario. I don't
Yeah,
know.
so I won't agree or disagree with those specific names, because again, there's some big partners you named there of ours, but it is historically large companies thought that's fine. This disruption, I'll catch up later. I'll buy the company that's doing it. I can wait to see 5 or 6 examples and I'll be the 7th or 8th. That's fine. It's okay. It's going to happen slow enough. I think the difference now is it's happening so fast. The returns are coming so quickly. You'll see people coming in with different economic models competing for your customers, and you won't have the time to catch up or the financials to catch up, right? You won't have the money or the time, and some combination of that you need to be able to catch up. And that's when I talk to large companies, that's what I hear from them.
I think you buried the lead, so I'm going to go with that and then ask one of the questions we got. So here's a fundamental strategic piece of advice that up until recently has probably been an outlier, which is there will not be, in your opinion, which makes a lot of sense to me, by the way, an easy opportunity, maybe no opportunity to catch up, because the speed, not just its technological change, but its implementation, its return on investment is so ferociously fast that, the early mover who gets it right may garner so much momentum that not even a big player. And by the time you go to buy them, they might be so expensive that it's probably okay. So this is that's a divergence of strategic advice on average than what has come before. So let me ask 2 questions that we got at the very beginning. They both have to do with culture. The first has to do with boards, and boards have a challenge in many cases where they have some very long tenured members who may not be a good fit for this kind of a strategic shift, a change in mindset, an adoption of the idea of letting go of what we do. Okay, so I have that question, but I do want to say, for my part, and I think empirically this is generally true, it's not purely a function of age, it's sometimes a function of tenure, which does correlate with age sometimes. And I mention that only because there's a guy named Gordon Tullock who's worth looking up, and all the things that we think, were fresh and new, he passed away about 10 years ago. He's fairly well known in the public choice economics theory space. He was so crotchety that he actually didn't win the Nobel Prize along with his co-author, James Buchanan, because people just didn't like him. But he read sci-fi from when he was really young, and by the time I met him when he was 87, he had on his shelves like 3,000 sci-fi books and kept up with everything, and he would take notes and compare them to his journals, and half the time he'd come up with the idea before, and he was coming up with stuff at 87. So it's not age. He actually, before he passed away, envisioned LLMs, right, and talked about them in a little blog that he wrote at the age of 92. With that as a given, so that we are not age discriminating here, there's a tenure problem, habit forming. What do we do about that? How do boards fix that challenge if you agree with it? What can they do?
Well, we
Yeah,
focus.
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say we focus on AI education. And by the way, we all need AI education, whether we spend every day in this space or not, right? I mean, we live and breathe in this space, and we still feel like we need education on a daily basis. In fact, at Entify, we created executive AI sessions for this reason, because board members and executive teams, they sometimes just want to understand what's the latest in the space. How do I basically translate these buzzwords into action, right? And how do I take my use cases and materialize them? Or how do I even understand what my company needs as use cases, right? What are our, top 10 problems, and how do we translate those into initiatives? Or do we turn them into initiatives, right? Or are they important ROI cases or not, right? We have these sessions, and they're not even sales sessions, they're just educational sessions to basically keep objective and say, here's where the industry is at today. And if you need help, X, Y, Z are the next steps. And that happens at an executive and board level for this exact reason, because I think most of the challenge today is just people trying to keep up with what's out there, what's happening, how to distinguish, tool A from tool B, just like a lot of this happened right in software too. So it's like that all over again, but I think on steroids. So AI education, I think it's critical. And then the other piece is, when we're having those board discussions, like one of the things we've talked about in prior sessions is, how do we have the technology voice come through a little bit, right? And that can happen from existing members that have the background or that have the understanding, or it can come from an AI scientist within the company. And not every company is a tech company, like you've said, right? You could be, a pharma company, you could be, a manufacturing, you could be a retail company, finance organization. You may not have an AI scientist, but that's where you have to partner. I think we were just talking about this in the recent engagement, other speaking engagement I was in. Making sure that you at least have partnered with somebody in the space that understands the market and understands the technologies and understands your needs, I think is really important moving into that next phase. So, I mean, as an entrepreneur, personally, I believe there's always an opportunity to engage in the technology transformation, right? It's never too late, and it does get harder. It's always more expensive as you delay, like Jeff says, right? It's always more expensive to catch up and react to change if you wait for these trends to happen and then you're a later adopter. But it's never too late to get your company to be ahead, right? Or to catch up to the latest state in technology. And there are definitely always opportunities to do that. It's just a matter of what steps you take. And what's funny? I think about this when it comes to internet and then fiber. Bhutan was a very late adopter of internet, and then they had like fiber and the fastest internet just later in time, right? So sometimes the later adopters, they get to more, higher quality and better pace of change than everybody else by just doing it later, and they have to take a 10x step. So it's just a matter of what those steps look like. And I think AI education is really critical. And then that commitment piece is really critical, and finding the right partners. So we're one such partner. Jeff understands this. He's one such partner. So these are the kind of companies you have to partner with to be able to be strong walking into that next conversation.
Yeah.
Jeff, I'm going to ask you a follow-up, but I want to get very brass tacks. Brian, that was great. Thank you. And I think kind of a dose of reality in some sense. But Jeff, for you, and I know you interface with lots and lots of boards, and so do you, Brian. But Jeff, I think you're in a position where maybe you've been able to observe this dynamic. Here's the question. Let me frame it very bluntly. So in the world of director skills, we tend to put people into about 4 categories. There's nuances. One category is they don't have it, and their viewpoint is, that's not what I do. I'm never going to know that. I don't. Thanks so much. There's another category, which is kind of a spectrum, which is, hey, I either didn't have it, but I can speak the language a little. I understand the vocabulary. I can listen to a consultant in an informed way. Maybe they arrived at that knowledge or they had to build it, but either way, that's a different category. Then there's this kind of in-between category, short of expert, but it is a proficient in a reasonable way. So, they can keep up, they can ask hard questions, but they can't answer the third follow-up question. Right? That's not them. And then there's experts. So here's the brass tacks question. If someone on AI is in the first category and unwilling to go to the second category, that is to say, like, listen, I'm a marketing specialist. I'm old school. I do sales. I can help you with all sorts of things. This AI thing, I'm just not going to really engage with it because you got other people. Do you think that person belongs on a board or not in the modern era? They're not willing to go into the next category, which is fine, I'll take the 8-hour course, I'll do these supplementals, I'll read a couple hours a month, I'll at least be able to speak the language. They don't want to do that. Sorry to call you out. See, you're not necessarily the client guy. I know Brianne has to go show up in front of boards, so I'm not going to ask her this question outright. I'm asking it to you, Jeff. You deal with clients, but I don't think you often close them. So it'd be unfair to ask Brianne that question.
No. So Dan, I think that you're right. When you were asked the original question, I was thinking this is really about a question for the chair and the CEO, right? Is how do they want to form their boards? And I think what you're indicating, the first bucket, is not having a, for lack of, I'll put I think a Stanford buzzword, a growth mindset, right? The ability to evolve and change. And I think that chairs and CEOs, when I talk to them, and it's usually privately, right? Any complaints they have around sort of your first bucket is they want more people in there who can evolve and grow. But what I'll continue on and say is inside of this particular space, I think there's a recognition that you can't necessarily train your board up on AI enough and have the level of discourse and strategic insight that you need going forward. And AI will say advanced technologies, all the change in things that are happening in the world. And so I do think you don't really want that first bucket because they sound like they don't have an idea of evolving and growing with your organization even. So chairs and CEOs, I think, recognize that. But on this particular topic, advanced tech, and I know, again, from the title, we promise more advanced tech, and thinking about the future, even though we're talking about a lot about AI, I do think what I'm seeing is people needing to augment by bringing in an expert, a proficient expert, somebody who can translate from technology into the reality of the industry, into the reality of that business, which isn't necessarily the PhD computer scientists. It's not exclusive of them, but they're brilliant, they're smart, they understand depth of technology, but they can't relate it to what you do. It's not powerful and useful. I think that this is where the boards, the leading boards and PR people and CEOs that I talk to are like, okay, I need to add in to my environment. And that profile is different from what they've recruited before.
Yeah.
Ex-CEOs aren't necessarily the people for this. There is definitely a place for ex-CEOs on boards. I imagine a lot of ones are on the call. They should all keep their positions, but the augmenting of a board, the recognition that the idea of technology and what it can do is important enough to every industry and every company's future. You need that, whether you form a new committee structure around it, which we've had some discussions around, or you do something, you tuck it into one of the other committees. It's that important to everybody's future.
I think so. Let me rephrase. First, Carol Dweck would be very pleased to hear you reference my system. So a good answer, but it's a fair answer. It's a dodge, but not really a dodge. The chair of the board and the board needs to decide what culture it wants with respect to the first bucket, right? Yep. Is that the kind of person you want on your board? Maybe as a chair of a board, I would say generally no, but maybe the exception makes the rule. But what I also heard you say, which is interesting, is, okay, so everyone has a vocabulary, hopefully with some effort, but this highly proficient versus expert, that's actually a more difficult call, right? You don't have to have a double PhD who might not be a fulsome board member, right? That's the other challenge we have for hyper specialization. You maybe can retain outside experts for that, but you just have someone who really is proficient enough to do the translating across strategy, across technical, across business. Okay, that's actually, in my mind, a very reassuring answer, because it's kind of like finding a unicorn, with wings, right? That you find the super deep expert that also can work well on a board and whose knowledge doesn't expire quickly. So let me ask a segue question to the bigger picture, which is, this is a question we received, how do CHROs or other leaders within the organization cultivate a deep culture of innovation that maps to what both of you identified, which is, listen, it's not just AI, it's other things. And it's not just the holy grail, let's work for 5 years, spend $1 billion and flip a switch and now we're better, but rather lots of incremental, learnings and tests and so on. But that requires a deep culture that embraces innovation, embraces small failures. Let's take the people officer, how does a CHRO, clearly with the backing and encouragement of the board, build that kind of culture in today's environment? And let's pick a non-tech company operating out of, someplace other than Northern California, who's clearly impacted by technology, but isn't about technology. Because I think some of those companies have a head start. So what do you do as a CHRO trying to build that culture of innovation? Thoughts?
I'll jump in just because that kind of is my job, right? So I did come from the Valley, but I work at
my
this
favorite job in all of consulting. Which is,
yes, I have this in a very traditional industry. So I think you have to recognize that, number one, you're right. It's got to be something systematic over time. We're talking about AI today. AI, I think we'll be talking about for the rest of our lifetimes, but there are other things that will happen that we will talk about. Brienne went through a list of 3 or 4 just off the top of her head, right, of the big shifts, technology shifts that have happened easily in our lifetime that we need to be paying attention to. So I think organizations need to recognize that it's not about a moment in time. It's about creating a capability within your organization over time. Our team, EY leadership, decided to bring in a specific person, me, to come and help build that. I think that for many of the traditional organizations, that's a good point to allow for a focused intent, right? It's almost a symbolic focused intent of building up this culture over a number of years and saying, we're going to go through a couple different iterations of this, but we're going to build up this idea that we invent, the idea that we can invent new things and we can bring them up through the organization. We take a lot of venture capital. I was a venture capitalist before. We take a lot of those models and examples of how we think about businesses, how we think about experimentation, and we built it into our systems and processes. I think that's a multi-year thing, not a point in time thing. So I think the CHRO has to think about it as, how do I think about it as a 2, 5, 10-year plan, not a, I'll just educate everybody. We'll watch the video, we'll do the lessons, and then I'm done with this innovation thing. I think it has to be built into the organization. But I could go very, very deep on it.
Let me extract a summary of this. So it's a multi-phase, multi-step process. It's not a big bang all at once. And as an observer watching EY, I might even see some perspective that you don't, which is the creation of your role and its mission and duty was sort of the opposite of an innovation center. So I've observed lots of companies that create centers for innovation. They have like a place, and it's a very expensive piece of real estate in which people appear not to be doing a whole lot and just like sucks money out of your P&L. Whereas your position is imbued throughout the organization, right? And kind of symbolizes and encourages, and then you formalize some paths, right? But it's not, you weren't hired to head a center. And that's a telling difference, right? So culturally, that's quite a bit of a difference, I would say, from an outsider looking in. So Brienne, what would you add to that, if anything, about this culture of innovation? Again, we're trying to think, I'm a director and I'm trying to support my CHRO, and I don't have a head start. I'm not a big tech company who was built from innovation ground up as of 15 years ago.
Yeah, this is a really, really interesting question, especially being in the Silicon Valley. You know, innovation culture is such a big part of what we do and who we are. We focus, when we started our company, Alston and I built innovation culture as part of the first initiatives for talent and organization. Often you see culture kind of that secondary thing that you do once you're at a size where culture matters, then you start focusing on it. But for us, focusing on innovation and how to be creative and how to create, new things that people are going to care about to save them time so they can live and work better, that's essentially fulfilling our mission. That was something we built in so early into our culture that it was never an afterthought, right? It was always at the forefront of, okay, how can we think about building products that are really going to impact everyday life for people. And then it became more about enterprises too, right? Which is just organizationally, how do we save time and how do we make things more efficient? I think building that in is so critical because every hour we spend in the day has to give us 10 hours back, right? That's that 10x factor that we're always talking about. So when it comes to our own individual skill sets, we have to just continue to think creatively about new. Everything just has to become new, and new ideas, new culture, new creativity, new innovations. And that threshold is getting much harder every day. To create something new today is much harder than it was 20 years ago, right? Or 15 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. So the bar is just constantly getting higher and higher. And it's getting harder to fulfill that when you have a new team member coming in and they're raising the average IQ. Like, that's going to just become harder and harder over time. So I would say, if I'm a new HR, director today, and I'm thinking about how do I brew innovation culture, I've got to instill it in the interview process. What have you done that's award-winning? What have you done that's different from all of your colleagues? What have you done that is, recognizable by your teams, right? What have you done that saved everybody time? What have you deployed that people have actually used, right, every day, or something that you've put in place throughout your career that people couldn't live without? What are these things that are unique to your role? Or to your function. And that doesn't have to just be in engineering, right? It could be in UI, UX. I actually think product design is something moving into this next evolution that's going to become increasingly important. What I touch and feel and how I experience AI and technology is going to be that next tier that people aren't talking about as much today. They're just focusing on the actual machine learning part. They don't think about the touch and feel part, which is, I think, how users are going to start thinking about that a little bit later. These are all very critical. We have, I think, more than 45 patents already issued at Entify, just in our small team in the years we've been in business. So innovation to us is, I think, very important. And unless you make that a part of your culture from the beginning and you create it as part of your hiring criteria, and trying to, make sure that that's part of your interview process to make sure people are standing apart, then it won't be something that you'll be able to continue through your company's journey.
So I love that answer. We have time for one more question. By the way, Brianne, I love how you're so modest that you did mention that 12 of those patents have your name on them. So thanks for that. Interestingly, we could either talk about one other tech area, which we failed miserably at, but we're going to let that go. And I'm going to ask a tactical director question. And it has two parts. So in this kind of disruption, we got asked this, for example, a CTO might be defensive as things show up and like really just disrupt things. And that slows things down. It makes it hard to tackle. And in addition, there's a question, how can a director really bring value add to, say, the oversight of AI, or maybe the oversight of blockchain, or whatever the implementation of technology is? So I'm going to put those two things together and ask you as briefly as possible, and then give us a to-do, a takeaway. Go read this, go do that, go listen to this, whatever it might be. What's the right way to navigate this as a director? Humans are humans, and that CTO who suddenly feels obsolesced, they may, or maybe they're a great person and you get everything you would get out of them, but maybe they're a human and you get things more slowly with a little bit of, we're putting a pause until we figure it out. How do you navigate that, and how do you bring value as a director while doing that kind of on both ends? Like, don't go in with both feet before checking how deep the water is, but don't put a moratorium for 4 years as you figure it out, right? And as a director, what can I do to learn more? So I'm going to have Jeff go first and Brianne go last. Jeff, give us your 1 minute answer or so, and then we'll go from there. And then people will be wanting more later, and they can reach you separately.
No, yes, I have a good friend of mine, and this is why I know innovation doesn't, age is not the factor of innovation. He's a multi-time CEO, sits on many boards of companies that we all know the names of. And he said to me once, a few years ago, I can no longer rely on my 35 years of experience leading companies. I just have to accept the world as it is and move forward. And I think that that's sort of a mindset and mentality for directors, saying, I have models of things I've done and way I've done them before, but the time that we are at is so unique and different that I have to be accepting of perhaps this is new, or I have to attack it a different way and not say, what I did 15 years ago makes sense today, right? Because we really are at a different time. So I'd say that would be some of my advice for directors.
I love that. And I think I know who you're talking about. And if that person can do that, the rest of us should be able to do that too. That's amazing. Okay.
I think you know them. And then the thing you should look at and read, again, there are clients, so I won't say the names. Go look at all the launches of the LLMs, just for fun. It's a pure entertaining things. There's all these brief versions, the 17-minute version of the launch day for blah, blah, blah. And just look at what they're doing. And they're all talking about things at the consumer level. And just think, how would I apply that to my business? You can see them pulling data from different sources together, summarizing all the things Brienne's company is doing. They're doing it at the consumer level, Brienne's doing it at the enterprise level. When you see that, you understand the magic of the moment.
I love it. Brienne, you get the last 60 seconds or so. So what would you say?
I'll try to keep it to 30 seconds. So I think the way directors can make an impact here is just two parts. So the first one is set the charter for the organization, make it a priority, make it an initiative with action steps. The second one is establishing a partnership. Establish who your AI partner is going to be. If you're a tech company, that ends up being internal potentially with maybe augmentation with a partner. If you're not a tech company, which many are not, right? Even if you are, you may need help. Then establish the right partner, because ideally that partner should be a multi-year partner, and you shouldn't have to go find new vendors and manage, multiple vendors for every use case. Find the partner. And an awesome next step as an enterprise or as a normal organization of any size, create an AI day for your executives to understand and learn, have roundtables, workshops dedicated to understanding how AI applies to your business, right? To your roles, to your teams. Create that open dialogue. Not everybody wants to talk about how they may not understand every buzzword or every AI conversation, and they may need help in their departments. They may need to understand what's next for the organization. So if you have additional time and interest, I'm here to support. So feel free to reach out to me, and I would love to help anybody with those conversations or workshops at any time.
Great. All right. We're out of time, but it was fun as expected. We definitely have to do a follow-up for other technology areas, which we will do. Again, Jeff and Brienne, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And SVDX sponsors, of course, we appreciate you. Nancy, I think we're done. I'll hand it over to you. Thanks, everyone.